A lot of people are here tonight to talk about water or learn about water or are concerned about water. And given that that was the case, I know that we've heard from a number of concerned residents that are concerned about water rate increase, about water. And given that that was the case, I know that we've heard from a number of concerned residents that are concerned about water rate increases, and I would offer that this issue has been probably the most talked about, most debated topic in this city in the last 100 years. So what we've done is put together some information, all of you, and for the council tonight to talk a little bit about the history of water in the city of Philomath, some of the key decision points and pivot points that we encountered throughout our journey, and our involvement with water started back in around December 12th, 1905, right? When Philomath started a franchise agreement with the city of Corvallis, right? Franchise agreement, which I actually found a copy of from 1905, reads as follows. For the mountain water system, what some of the terms are: the franchise granted to the city of Corvallis by the Philomath Council last week gives to Corvallis the right to lay mains and pipes through the streets and supply water to the citizens of Philomath. The franchise is to exist for 99 years. It is provided that water shall be furnished to the people of Philomath at the same rates that are given the citizens of Corvallis. Ultimately, Philomath is certain to become a heavy consumer of water of the Corvallis system, and a good revenue will ensure. That town is growing very fast, numbering already a population of 525 souls, according to the census made by Assessor Davis. It is a town of homes and a good community to live in, and as it grows, will use more and more of mountain water. The fire protection it will get through the mountain water system will be of great value, and all that it costs is the franchise just granted. Okay, so that was December 12th in 1905. Our history in terms of water and water systems within the city of Philomath. So prior to that time, our city, as we had talked about some time ago, was established in 1882. And from 1882 to 1905, as best as we can understand, that people just simply took their drinking water out of the Willamette River or out of the Marys River and drank it untreated. Obviously, with the advent of the Industrial Revolution in the early 1900s and some of the upstream activities going on by factories, less palatable and less desirable to people, so they actually wanted some fresh mountain water. Hence, this agreement was established with the city of Corvallis at that time, and Philomath entered into its first of a number of intergovernmental agreements that it shared with the city of Corvallis exclusively all the way until the 1960s and the 1970s. Right, where all water was bought from Corvallis and the Rock Creek Intertie. And at some point, there was a group of people, not unlike yourselves, that said, I don't know if I like all of this dependence upon Corvallis water. We need to tap our own wells, right? So the city in the 70s, 80s tapped a couple wells of their own to start pulling water from. But in the early 80s, right, there was in the early 80s, right, there was how many, show of hands, how many people lived here in the 1980s? Okay, a few hands. Okay, in the 1980s, there were some significant contamination issues with the water, right? And we'll talk about that. There was a lot of contamination and a lot of issues, and that really became the catalyst and the foundation to establish our own water plant, right? That happened in the mid-'80s, and we've been utilizing a water plant ever since. Originally, it was designed to be a 20-year plant, and now we're at year 30. Out here tonight is the aging plant infrastructure, some of the outdated technology, and some of the spare part obsolescence that we face with the current plant and operating as we do. So I'll go ahead and proceed. So again, this here we got Mary's Peak on the left. We got Mary's Peak on the left, and we've got a picture of the pipe that was actually utilized during the mountain water era from the Benton County History Museum that actually transferred water here. Here's the Rock Creek Reservoir, right, where a lot of that water was sourced. Water was sourced from Philomath for over 50 years. That we drew directly from Corvallis. We were essentially treated like any other suburb of Corvallis, right, to receive water. But then in the mid-'70s, right, and specifically, I'll read a paraphrase from 15 July 1975 from the Gazette-Times. Water rates here will increase for the first time in 15 years, beginning with July bills. Philomath depends on the city of Corvallis for its water supply. So far, negotiations on a new contract with Corvallis have not been going well, from Philomath's point of view. We're at their mercy, said Robert Muir, a member of the Philomath Water Commission, when he reported to the council Monday night. Muir said the contract to be signed with Corvallis increases the rate charged to Philomath by 50% for the first million cubic feet of water used each month. The rate for the amount used in excess of 1 million cubic feet will more than double. Excess of 1 million cubic feet will more than double. Okay, so that gives you an excerpt of 1975 and how the city of Philomath was ultimately being treated back at that time by its neighbor. Once the wells were put in, you can see the quote here, the smelly brew that comes out of the taps in some parts of the county is safe to drink. It's just that no one wants to drink it, right? So this bottle in the middle is a sample of what that water looked like, right? That people had to drink out of the wells here in Philomath, right? So there were a number of meetings. There were people from the state that came and talked to residents here in Philomath. And one of the questions that came up during those meetings, a man raised his hand and says, "Why don't we go back?" "Why don't we go back to Corvallis for water instead of using our own tap wells?" Well, obviously, given how we were treated in the 1970s, we probably wouldn't be treated any better had we done that in the mid-'80s. But there was a call to clean up the water. Obviously, we weren't going to continue to drink what's shown here on the page. So that brought us to building a new water plant, right? So the city got together and they said, hey, we've got, and in order to be able to afford our own water plant, so we are better in control of our own destiny as it relates to water, right? So we established the water plant that you see here based upon investments. And today, about 97% of our water comes from the Marys River through this plant. We still have an 11th Street well. We still have access to the Corvallis intertie and use that during maintenance periods and downtime when the main plant isn't operating, or in some cases during the summer months where we're volume. But by and large, most of everything comes through the plant. There was another slide there somewhere. Anyway, so one of the things that happened is there was a resolution in this same not this city chambers, but the old city hall chambers, right, to increase water rates. And that was to increase the base rate by a factor of about 300% and increase the per unit rate by about 23%. People like you and me in a room like this 34 years ago to decide to build the plant in the first place. Again, it was a 20-year plant. We're at year 34. The good thing is, since we implemented the plant, and as per our water quality report that was recently published and is available for you on the city website, that we now pass 120 drinking water quality standards put in place by the Oregon Department of Health or the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, right? So our water is far cry better than what it was in 1985. Okay? But again, we're on year 34 of a plant that was intended to last for 20 years. We have Dennis Lewis here, who works tirelessly and very creatively in coming up with unique solutions to obsolete parts that are no longer commercially available. He's pulling all kinds of, but I would equate it to being kind of like using paper clips and rubber bands to keep things going. And so we are really at a point where we are struggling to keep the plant together, and we're desperately in need of a replacement plant. Need of a replacement plant. So that's what we talked to, and probably what drew many of you here tonight, is that we have proposed a future water plant. We've been working with West Tech Engineering, who is designing a design for a plant which will double, if not triple, our current capacity in our current water plant. It utilizes a membrane filtration, which is the latest technology and is much better at separating any contamination. The estimated cost of that water plant in today's dollars is about $9 million for the water plant and about $3 million for a storage reservoir that would be located just to the right of the current water plant location. So the one thing that's interesting is that we had to raise rates in 1985 to about $10 and change. And since that time, in 30 years, our current base rate is now $14, right? So about a $4 increase over a 30-year time frame says we haven't significantly increased the base rate in quite some time. Unit charge, or basically the volume that you utilize on a daily basis, shown there. What's proposed, you see, go to $24 for the base rate and a per unit charge of $5.10. All right. Why do we need to increase rates of water? That's how we have to pay for the plant, right? We pay for the plant much like any of you do. Who here has bought a house? Okay, bought a car, right? You do that through financing. You show them your credit, you show them your income. They have some understanding that you have the ability to repay the money that you borrow, right? That's kind of how it works. Otherwise, you don't get the bank loan and you don't get the house. That's the world we live in. It's not much different in government. That's the world we live in. It's not much different in government, right? You want to buy a $9 million water plant to replace your aging one, then you've got to be able to demonstrate as a community that you're willing to put up the money to be able to service debt. So that's part of what is driving the rate increases. Now we have done, this is not a fun thing for me to come and deliver to you, right? But it's part of the reality of the world that we live in currently, right? Is we have to live in currently, right? Is we have to build a new plant. Now, as far as how our base rate compares to other neighboring cities or cities in the region, right? You can kind of see right here how they compare. I would pay particular attention to the comparison between Philomath and Jefferson. Why do I bring attention to that? Well, Jefferson is building the exact style and same type of plant, a membrane filtration plant, a membrane filtration plant that we plan to build, right? They're working with West Tech Engineering, which is the same engineering firm that we retain for our services that are designing our plant. They have, I have another chart in here. So I have a tale of two cities, right, between us and Jefferson. You can see the differences of population there, but you can see the sliding scope of the base fee and how it starts at $14 where it is today and ramps to $35 over 2 or 3 year period. Okay? The whole idea of making gradual increases every 6 months was vetted and considered and talked about at length by the Public Works Committee meeting because we were thinking about all of you, right? Because we were thinking about all of you, right? We realized if we went from $14 to $35, it would be a huge shock to everyone, right, to absorb that level of increase. And so we were sensitive to that, and we looked at our north here in Jefferson in terms of the approach that they took and they went about in terms of financing the plant. The route that they took was the exact same in terms of gradual going to the community, having a meeting like this, having to make gradual increases to a bond issuer to finance the construction of their plant. Right now, I think they have just finished the engineering portion, and we actually had the Public Works Director and I both had a conference call last week with the Public Works Director in Jefferson. I also had an opportunity to speak with their mayor and talk about the process that Jefferson utilized. Mayor Myers and was very willing to share information and how they went about this same issue. One of the other challenges I think that people ask about, and there's a lot of variation in terms of water usage, right? So there's some seasonality where you see on the left, it starts in January in a winter month. And as you get closer to June, July, August, right, it's going to go up to a spike. And then it comes back down in the fall. All right, and in the winter, then the water usage is less. You go to the next year, you've seen the same spike. So one of the difficulties and challenges that we have is that if we tie our rate increase to a variable rate, then that creates a real ebb and flow and spikiness when you think about it is how do we finance debt with this level of uncertainty in terms of the money coming in, right? So that's one of the things that we had to consider at a committee level for the recommendation that's been passed through to the council tonight. One of the other things, this chart shows the annual volume of production coming through the plant over ramps up to 185, 187, and then what's been happening? It's been going down. Good news is people have been conserving water. Good news is Public Works has been sealing some leakage in the system, so we're not wasting any water. So we're not wasting any water. But again, given that level of variability, it's difficult in the world of finance to go to a bond lender to say, we're going to have the money if we tie it to a variable rate as opposed to a fixed fee, a fixed base rate. A fixed base rate. A lot of people ask me about the apartments. Hey, we got a lot of big apartment complexes coming in. What's their share? Aren't they supposed to be paying for this? Well, the fact is that they are, and that we have collected about 300 apartments and the Boulevard apartments since they began construction. So a lot of that money can be utilized towards financing the engineering and design of the new plant that we're talking about. Water plant engineering and finance planning here in 2019. We've talked about, or will talk about tonight, the gradual rate increases happening over about a year or so period of time, 2-year period of time, which will all lead us to a bond issuance that we anticipate will happen, in January of 21. And at that point in 2021-22 timeframe will be when we construct the new plant. The new plant would be operational in 2022, and we would decommission the old plant at that time. I think it's important to point out that we're at year 38 of a plant that was designed for 20 years. So what it means is that we're adding an additional 4 years onto a plant that's already a year 34. So we're almost at double the life, the intended life, or our existing plant by the time the new one is operational. Now, obviously, as a community, if you want to go back to Corvallis, history would suggest, I think we know how we would be. That's certainly an option. Another question I think that typically gets asked by some is, well, why did we start this process earlier, right? Why didn't we start increasing water rates earlier? Well, we had, if history serves me right, we had sewage in the streets. We had sewage discharges into the Marys River. We had sewage discharges into Newton Creek, right? And those were significant health issues that needed to be addressed immediately with new sewage infrastructure improvements. Right? So the sewer lagoons became the priority that we finished in 2012 to alleviate problems like that. Probably my last slide, and I'll talk about here, people always say, do we have enough water? Are we going to run out of water? Right? It's a question I've asked specifically of Chris Brugado, our city engineer, in these chambers back in October when we had the public hearing. His answer was stated there that the city currently has sufficient water supply with the inclusion of the Corvallis water intertie. And as well as the new water treatment plant is needed. That concludes my prepared remarks here, but hopefully this was helpful for all of you just to have a little bit better understanding of the history of the water system,